Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with some more RTD news updates. And as you can tell from today's title, Black Americans twice as likely to default. I'm going to be covering some alarming statistics that's happening right now in the inner city when it comes to African Americans and the opportunity to go into college, and finding out how most of them are signing their names on a dotted line, but not actually able to get through the entire process of actually finishing school. But at the end of the day, they're still stuck with the debt and how those percentages are increasing. And as always, before we dive into today's articles, I have about 3 or 4 articles to share with you. I want to encourage you to click the RTD subscribe button for more RTD interviews and news updates, as well as if you're new to Rethinking a Dollar, I want to encourage you to visit the RTD University page, where I share a lot of my prior interviews dealing with Rethinking a Dollar, our monetary system, and all the events surrounding our current economy. So other than that, let's dive into today's news. So as I mentioned, I have 4 articles I want to share with you, all dealing with what's happening in the news in regards to student loans and the problems that are developing because of the amount of defaults that are increasing. And it happens to be more so among the African-American community. And so there's a couple statistics I want to point out here that kind of points to the idea that even though the stock market is at an all-time high, there's a lot of information about Trump trying to pick Federal Reserve Board members and things like that. And so all of that stuff is on the surface, but yet what there's not really been talked about much is the fact that, you know, the younger generation, those that are expected to be future taxpayers, are the ones right now that are being hit the hardest because they are told to go to school in order to get a job. They have to go to college to do so. But yeah, a lot of kids are leaving the high school realm, going into college, not even knowing what to study or knowing even, what the process is for taking on debt. And then realizing the fact that, the debt they may take on may not be something they can pay back depending upon the career field they choose. And so a lot of kids are being misled. And so this has something that should be of alarming to all of us, because this is our future here. And if these kids are starting off in debt, it's good to say that they won't have the same type of lifestyle or quality of life that their parents and their grandparents probably had. So it's just going to get worse and worse. And we're supposed to be in somewhat of what some people would say an economic recovery. So if we're in an economic recovery and kids are having problems paying back their debt, imagine when the recession hits or the next economic downturn hits, how things might be even worse for everyone. So as always, I want to give you my thoughts and leave the articles below for you to dive into it further for yourself. But I want to encourage you to, share your thoughts on this as well. If you find this informative, please feel free to share this with our family and friends so they can begin taking notice of these issues that aren't really being discussed much. So let's dive into the very first article. And so the first one here is from CNBC. It's a little bit of an older one, about a month or 2 ago, but it talks about how this past year, or this current year rather, is a record high for student loans. We're at 1.4 trillion and counting of student loan debt. And so that's student loan balances jumped nearly 150% in a decade. Then the next article here is from Bloomberg, and this one is as of this current week. Or last week rather, and it says Black Americans twice as likely as whites to default on student debt. So it shares with you some recent statistics from a study that that our organization has taken since the last economic crisis up until current, and some of the findings that they found of how overwhelming number of African Americans have already defaulted and in a position to default. And then the next one here is from ACA News, and it says federal student loan debts rates see slight uptick. And then the very last one here talks about from CNBC, and it says, here's what happens when you default on your student loans and how to get back on track. So it just goes through a couple numbers and it gives a watered down version of how to get back on track. But at the end of the day, once you're that deep in the hole, it's kind of too late to actually get back on track in a reasonable time frame. So let's dive into the very first one. And so here, just to give you an idea what's on the surface. As always, I want to skim through them, but yet leave you something to think about. And it says student loan balances jumped nearly 150% in a decade. And then give you a little bit of a highlight. It says, as college costs continue to rise, outstanding student debt has ballooned to an all-time high of 1.4 trillion. It says still, delinquencies have decreased, which may mean that consumers are managing their loan payments better than they have in the past. So this is, based upon from this past summer. And it says for recent graduates, a student loan debt may be very shape the rest of their lives. Over the last decade, college loans balances in the United States have jumped from more than 833 billion to reach an all-time high of 1.4. It says the average outstanding balance is now $34,144, up 62% over the last 10 years. So this is all within the last 10 years since the Great Recession has happened. It says, in addition, the percentage of borrowers who owe more than $50,000 has tripled over the same time period. So it gives a little bit of graph here from Generation Z of approximately 11,830, Generation Y, 33,000, Generation X, 39,000, and so forth. Then it goes down to give you a little bit more of average student loans per consumer. And so amongst the Generation Z, it's 2.6, Generation Y, 4.4. And then he talks about student loan balances are on the rise, which is a result of the increasing cost of higher education. So not only is the cost of going to school increasing steadily, the kids are taking on more debt because they have to pay for this. And so it's kind of unfortunate for them that, you know, they're taking on a lot of debt, not even knowing what they're going to school to study, other than just being fed the dream of, in order to get into the workforce, you're going to need a college degree. It says many graduates have expressed buyer's remorse regarding the cost of their education. It says, according to a separate survey by Citizens Bank, it says to that point, 57% said they regret taking out as many loans as they did, and 36% said they would not have gone to college if they fully understood the associated costs. So that's 57% regret taking out as much debt as they have, and 36 said if they knew what they were getting into, they wouldn't have done it. So just some statistics to think about there. And now we're going to get into what, you know, this is really all about. It says Black Americans twice as likely as whites to default on student debt. And so this is as of last week. And it says nearly half of Black Americans who borrow from the federal government to attend college defaulted on their student loans, more than double the rate among white student debtors. It says the figures are part of a comprehensive report out this current month of students who first enrolled in college during the 03-04 academic year, and whether they defaulted on at least one federal loan over the past 12 years up until 2015. And so this is done by Robert Ketchland as assistant professor of Seton Hall. It says the difference are stark. It says some 48.6% of Black student debtors defaulted on their federal loan, compared to 10.8% for Asians, 20% for whites, and 34% for Hispanics. So it gives you a little graph here of overall who has defaulted. And so the African American community is leading the way. And me being Black myself, I have a viewpoint on that I'm going to share at the very end. But yet it has to do with the idea that a lot of kids in the inner city are just encouraged to go to college. I mean, the idea of success is not even to graduate anymore, is that if you don't go to college, then you're not going to be on the pathway towards a successful career down the line. But yet most kids aren't given guidance as to what they should study, even if it's worth even going to college, as opposed to perhaps taking up a trade or entering into the entrepreneur realm and just using your mind and your gifts that you currently have to find a way to add value into people's lives for a living. So it says nearly 2/3 of Black students who took out loans to attend for-profit colleges, or 67%, ended up in default, the data shows. It says many of these students likely left school in the heart of the Great Recession, when jobs were harder to come by and raises minimal. It says, and to a large share of them are probably in their late 30s now, which should be a peak home buying age. It says, but defaults can haunt buyers for years, damaging their credit and preventing them from getting mortgages and even apartments or jobs. So if you can't basically get through this educational process in the form of being able to pay off your current debt with the student loans and then get a job, there's no way you can enter the workforce and take out more debt in the form of a mortgage, a car note, and all the other things that come with, you know, living the American dream. So just some statistics worth thinking about that I definitely think more people need to be aware of. The very next one here says federal student loan debt raises, see slight uptick. And it says the United States Department of Education standard to measure student loan defaults yields increased for the first time since 2013, while the overall long-term rates have declined. And so just the very first paragraph, it says consumers who enter the repayment plans for federal student loans between fiscal years 2013 and 2014 defaulted at a higher rate than their peers who began repaying in the previous fiscal year. It says the default rate inched up from 11.3% to 11.5%. So just to give you some statistics on how, even in the getting back on track phase, there's an increase in people who are defaulting. So, it's no real getting back on track once you enter into a world where your life is already consumed in debt. It makes it very difficult to survive and to try to get some footing to get in the process of repaying back your debt. So here's the very last article here. It says, here's what happens if you default on your student loans and how to get back on track. So once again, it gives you some statistics. It says the number of Americans who are defaulted on their student loans have reached a new high. It says the Institute for College Access and Success shows that 8.5 million borrowers who are in default as of June 30th, 2017. And now more than half of those defaults came in the first half of this year alone. It says more than 44 million Americans have taken out loans. So that is approximately 1/6 of our population has a student loan of some kind. It says, which can seem more necessary and yet also cost more than ever. It says their debt totals 1.4 trillion. The average low debt for 20-year-olds is $22,135. And if you're in your 30s going back to school, it's $34,000. It says the cost of tuition keeps rising while wages often don't. It says what could happen? According to the U.S. Department of Education, the loan becomes delinquent for the first day after you miss a payment and will remain delinquent until the past due date repaid or the payment balance is adjusted. And then it says after 270 days, the loan goes into default. And then here it gives you some more things on how to, get back on track. But one thing that I scroll to the very bottom, it says, if you miss payments, can't pay, or think you may default, talk to your lender immediately to see what options you may have. It says if you have trouble and defaulted, contact the organization and notify them as soon as possible. Then it goes on to say, for rehabilitation, you must agree to make a series of payments over 10 consecutive months based on your income. Consolidation allows you to combine the balance of all your federal loans into one, which could reduce the payment amount month to month. So here's this is what's happening in the news. Not getting much talk outside of what's happening mainstream with the all-time highs in the Dow Jones, of which all these these kids and adults now who've taken on student loans aren't really concerned with participating in this increase in the Dow Jones, and therefore they're not even concerned about retirement and investing because they're worried about trying to live for today and pretty much get this burden of debt off their shoulders. So one thing I want to share with you in regards to all this, student loan debt, and how this is a major problem that most people are not talking about. And so we've had all-time highs of the Dow Jones, but yet all-time highs at student loan debt. So the question is, if we're in an economic recovery or in a time period where, under the surface, there's a lot of problems in our monetary system as well as our economy, but on the surface, everything seems to be fine. And so a lot of my prior guests on RTD mentioned how, either this year around this time, coming into the end of this year, in the next few weeks, or sometime next year, we should expect a real market downturn. And that means our economy will really be going to some questionable times, i.e. a recession. And so if we enter a recession, with all this happening with these younger generation of kids being in debt, imagine all the kids or, students now that are taking on debt that are currently enrolled in school when things get tough and the jobs aren't as plentiful as they are right now for some. And so when there's no jobs available, then there'll be no way of kids repaying back their debt. So there's going to be an all-time high of defaults, because you have the kids that are already having problems paying. Then you're going to have the current college students enrolled in college now that's going to have problems, probably even graduating to then look for jobs to pay back. So what this means is that we are entering a phase where there's no returning for these kids to some form of sanity. The whole motto and the paradigm of, go to school, to get a good job, all that is currently changing, but yet the curriculum in school and just the mindset of teachers who are continuing to promote this level of livelihood is drastically changing. And I really feel sympathetic for those that haven't recognized the change and aren't prepared for the idea that we are entering into a new economy, and with this new economy will require a new level of thinking. And the idea of encouraging kids to continue to go to school is probably going to be outdated, or if not considered outdated already, especially if you don't know what you're going to school for, and if it's something that you're not even really interested in personally, other than the fact that it probably pays a lot of money, which is what most people seem to encourage kids to look for nowadays. So just wanted to share my thoughts and share with you the idea that this student debt is getting out of hand, and we're currently supposed to be in good times right now. So imagine how it would turn out for these the younger generation, for future taxpayers that can't even pay their debt if they're not even, finishing school, or if they finish school and are loaded with debt. So just wanted to share my thoughts with you. I'd love to hear your take on all this. Feel free to leave a comment below. Other than that, enjoy your day. Thanks.